The strangest part was how ordinary the route was. Not a cross-country coach, not a midnight run through mountains, not a bus that smelled like diesel and fate. Just a regional line that did the same loop every day, like a slow metronome for commuters who didn't want to think too hard. 2 stops apart. That became the phrase everyone repeated later because it sounded impossible even while it was true. A passenger boarded at stop A. The bus rolled forward. It reached stop B, and the passenger was gone. No one heard a scream. No one saw a fight. No one saw him get off. He didn't show up on the sidewalk, confused, asking for directions. He didn't wander into a nearby shop. He didn't call anyone to say he missed his stop. He just wasn't there. At first, people treated it like a mistake, then like a prank, then like one of those stories that grows legs because it scratches a primitive itch in the brain, the fear that you can disappear in a crowded place without anybody noticing. 18 months later, mechanics opened a locked underfloor compartment on that same bus, and the case stopped being a weird local rumor. It became a file with weight, because inside that compartment, they found evidence that the bus hadn't simply carried him. It had kept him, and the bus had done it while still running its route, still picking people up, still dropping them off, still passing inspection stickers that said everything was fine. For 18 months. The passenger's name was Daniel Rourke, 31 years old, not loud, not flashy, a person who tended to move through the world with the habit of not taking up too much space. He worked warehouse logistics for a distributor outside the city. He didn't have a big social footprint, no online performance, no steady stream of photos. He was, in the most basic way, a normal man who could vanish without the internet noticing for a while. But he wasn't a drifter. He wasn't disconnected. He had a sister who checked on him often. He had coworkers who relied on him. He had a lease. He had routines. His absence created immediate friction in the small gears of other people's lives, and friction is what makes missing cases visible. On a rainy Thursday in early spring, Daniel left his apartment with a backpack, a travel mug, and a phone that was almost fully charged. He was headed to a job interview across town. Nothing glamorous. A better shift, slightly better pay. The kind of interview you go to with cautious hope because you don't want to jinx it by believing too hard. He texted his sister that morning, something short, like he didn't want to be dramatic about it. Then he walked to the stop near his building. The bus that arrived was a standard city regional hybrid, not new, not ancient, white base paint, company colors, route number on a digital board, mildly tired seats, a driver who looked like he'd done the job long enough to stop noticing faces. Daniel tapped his fare card, stepped into the aisle, and moved toward the middle where the ride was smoother. He chose a seat on the right side, 2 rows behind the back door. Not a window seat, not an aisle seat. The kind of choice you make if you want to exist without being perceived. A few other passengers were on board, a student with headphones, a woman holding a bag of groceries, a man in a reflective vest leaning back with his eyes closed. Nothing about the scene suggested trouble. The bus pulled away. Stop faded behind it. 5 minutes of road, a gentle curve, a traffic light, another stretch past a row of small businesses, then stop B near a service station and a convenience store. At stop B, the doors opened. A couple of people got off. A couple got on. The driver checked the mirrors the way drivers do, not really looking at individuals, just checking for movement. Then the doors closed. The bus moved again. It was another passenger who noticed first. A woman sitting across the aisle from where Daniel had been looked up from her phone and realized the seat was empty. That alone meant nothing. People get off. People shift seats. People move to the back. But she was certain she hadn't seen him move. She'd glanced up when the doors opened. She'd seen the reflective vest guy stand and shuffle out. She'd seen the grocery bag woman squeeze toward the aisle. She'd heard the usual footsteps. She had not seen Daniel stand. She hadn't seen him pass. It lodged as a small question, a pebble in the brain. At the next stop, she looked again. Still empty. Another stop, another glance. Empty. By then the question had sharpened. Where did he go? People don't usually vanish off a bus. They do annoying things. They take calls on speaker. They smell like cigarettes. They block the aisle with bags. They fall asleep and miss their stop. They don't dissolve. She eventually told the driver at a later stop in a careful tone, like she didn't want to sound crazy. She said she thought a man might have left something behind. She pointed toward the seat. The driver glanced in the mirror, saw an empty seat, made a noise that could mean anything. He said the bus goes back and forth all day. People come and go, and lost items get turned in at the depot. That was normal. That was reasonable. Then, at the route's terminal, when the bus emptied out, the driver did his standard sweep. He walked down the aisle, checking for trash and forgotten bags. He found a travel mug under a seat, a crumpled receipt, a cheap umbrella. He did not find a backpack. He did not find a phone. He did not find anything that belonged to Daniel Rourke. Because those things weren't forgotten, they were gone with him. Daniel never showed up at the interview. His sister called him at lunch. No answer. His supervisor called him later. No answer. By evening, his absence wasn't just a missed appointment. It was a break in pattern. The report went in the usual way. At first, a missing adult. People say, maybe he decided to leave. People say he's an adult, he can disappear. They say it like a comfort, like autonomy is a magic shield against harm. But Daniel's sister kept pushing. Not with hysteria, with details. He had his interview. He had plans the next day. His rent was paid. His bank account showed no unusual activity. He had no reason to vanish. He had no history of dropping off the radar. She had one good fact that made the police listen sooner than they otherwise might have. He was last seen boarding a bus. Not a vague, went for a walk. Not a foggy, left the bar. A bus. A vehicle with cameras. A schedule. A driver log. Something concrete. The transit authority pulled video from the bus. At first it seemed straightforward. Daniel boarded at stop A at 9:14 a.m. He tapped his fare card. He walked toward the middle. He sat down. The camera angle wasn't perfect. The bus had multiple cameras, but they weren't cinematic. Grainy, wide, designed for deterrence more than clarity. Still, it was enough to see him. Then came stop B. The doors opened. People moved. The aisle filled with bodies for a moment. The view of Daniel's seat was partially blocked by someone standing near the door. Then the view cleared and the seat was empty. Not after a minute. Not after the bus moved again. Empty immediately, as if he had never been there. The investigators rewatched that segment until it made their eyes hurt. They looked for the obvious. Did he stand and slip out behind someone? Did he move to the back, out of camera view? Did he crouch down, fall? Nothing fit. The most unsettling part was how calm it looked. There wasn't a sudden rush, no frantic movement, no violence. The bus simply swallowed a man, The police interviewed the driver. He remembered nothing specific. He said he drove that route daily. Faces blurred together. He said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He said he checked mirrors at stops. He said if someone got off, they got off. They interviewed passengers they could identify, which was fewer than you'd hope. Most people pay with cards, but don't register names. Some routes kept fare tap records, but those were just numbers, not identities. A few riders came forward after local news ran the story. A missing man last seen on the bus. Most of them remembered the general mood. Rainy, quiet, the usual. One person remembered seeing Daniel rub his forehead like he had a headache. Another remembered him holding his backpack straps in that slightly tense way anxious people do. No one remembered him standing. No one remembered him leaving. The case began to slip into two tracks. One track was the ordinary track. Maybe he got off at stop B and no one noticed, and then something happened outside the bus. An accident, a sudden medical event, a crime unrelated to transit. The other track was the track that felt stupid to say out loud, which is why people said it quietly. Maybe something happened on the bus. The trouble with that second track was that the bus is a small space, and small spaces don't hide big events well. You can't wrestle someone to the floor without someone hearing. You can't haul a body past seated passengers without someone seeing. You can't do a magic trick in a public aisle, unless the public aisle isn't the only space. Every bus has voids, spaces under seats, panels, access hatches, underfloor compartments meant for tools, electronics, heating systems, emergency equipment. Most passengers never think about them. Most drivers rarely touch them unless something breaks. And in that specific model of bus, there was a maintenance compartment under the middle section, underfloor, locked, supposed to be accessed only at the depot. That detail sat in the background of the case, unnoticed at first because it seemed too technical to matter. Then, a month after Daniel vanished, the bus itself was inspected as part of the investigation. Transit cooperated publicly, at least. They allowed officers to search the vehicle. They checked underneath seats. They checked the rear area. They checked the driver's cabin. They checked all accessible panels. They found nothing, and the underfloor compartment, it was noted. It was locked. Transit said the key was kept at the depot and only mechanics had it. They said it held equipment and wiring. It wasn't designed to be accessed during a route. The police requested it be opened. Transit hesitated, not because they had something to hide, they claimed, but because opening it in the yard required scheduling. They needed a mechanic present. They needed the bus to be on blocks. It wasn't as simple as popping a glove box. That delay lasted days, then weeks. Then, in the routine grind of the case, it became one of those requests that sits on someone's desk with a sticky note and no urgency attached. Meanwhile, the bus kept running. Not that exact day, not immediately. Transit pulled it for a short period, cleaned it, returned it. It went back on its route because transit systems don't have spare fleets waiting around. A bus is a tool. If it passes safety checks, it runs. So the bus that had last carried Daniel Rourke continued to carry other people. For weeks, for months, until Daniel's case cooled to the degree these cases usually do. Slowly, painfully, without ceremony. His sister put up flyers. They got soggy in rain, peeled at corners, faded under sun. She kept searching online groups, kept calling, kept pushing. There were no major leads, no bank activity, no phone pings. His phone went silent after the last camera timestamp. People started saying the word voluntary again. They said it like they were trying to protect themselves from the truth. If a man can vanish on a bus, then anyone can. Better to believe he chose it. His sister didn't accept that. She didn't have the luxury. She kept her anger focused because wild anger burns you out fast. She asked for records. She asked for updates. She asked about the underfloor compartment again and again. She kept getting the same answer. It was checked. There's nothing. It's complicated. We'll follow up. 18 months is a long time for a missing person case to sit unresolved. Long enough for seasons to cycle, for the original detectives to rotate, for paperwork to shift hands, for the city to absorb the story into its background noise, long enough for the bus to become, ironically, just a bus again. Then the bus broke down on an ordinary morning, not on the route, at the depot. A persistent vibration, an unusual rattle under the floor. Mechanics ran it in the yard, listened, frowned. Something wasn't right. They pulled it into a bay. The mechanic who took lead that day was named Luis Calderon, 46. The kind of man who had repaired enough vehicles to know that machines develop personalities. Some buses whined. Some buses had doors that needed a shoulder shove. Some buses vibrated like a nervous leg. This one had a dull clunk beneath the mid-floor section that didn't match anything obvious. Luis put it on a lift. He did what mechanics do. He listened, tapped, traced. He checked the obvious systems. Then he came to the underfloor access panel. It was a rectangular section with a flush seam designed to be hidden under the passenger floor. Not something you notice unless you're looking for it. On paper, it was supposed to open easily with a standard depot key. Open, inspect, close, routine. Luis tried the key. It didn't turn smoothly. It resisted. He frowned, applied gentle pressure, stopped. Wrong pressure breaks keys, and broken keys in locks turn small problems into long days. He noticed something else. The lock cylinder wasn't the same as the ones on other buses of the same model. Not dramatically different, just newer, cleaner, different screw heads. Luis had a habit of noticing small mismatches because mismatches often tell you a story. A part replaced, a repair done, a fix made in a hurry. He checked the maintenance log. There was no record of a lock replacement. He tried again, slowly. The key turned with a gritty feel, like sand inside the mechanism. The panel loosened. A smell came out. Not fuel, not oil, stale air, dust. A faint sourness you don't expect from a clean depot floor. Luis held still for a second and then lifted the panel carefully. The compartment beneath was not huge, but it was larger than people would assume. A long cavity with metal framing meant to house equipment. It had wiring runs, a small area for tools, the kind of space you could crawl into if you had to, though you wouldn't want to. At first glance, it looked like the usual mess of a working bus. Dust, grit, a forgotten glove, maybe an old rag. Then Luis saw fabric, a backpack strap, gray, and the moment he saw it, the case came back into the world like a door slamming open. Because mechanics don't see backpacks inside underfloor compartments. Not there. Not like that. He shone his work light deeper. There's a backpack, wedged in the cavity, partially covered by a thin layer of dust, as if it had been there long enough to settle into the bus's hidden skin. Not shredded, not soaked, not eaten by rodents. Dusty, yes, a little grimy, but intact. Luis did not pull it out immediately. Something in him got cautious. The compartment felt wrong, like it was holding a secret that wasn't his to touch. He called a supervisor. The supervisor came, looked, went pale, and called transit security. Transit security called police. Within an hour, the bay had that quiet tension you feel when ordinary work turns into an investigation. People speak softer. People stand back. Someone puts up a cordon like it matters, even though it's just tape in a garage. An investigator arrived, gloves on, expression flat. He asked Luis to show him exactly what he did, step by step. Luis did. He kept his hands visible, partly because he didn't want anyone to think he staged it, and partly because that's what people do when they're suddenly surrounded by authority. They documented the compartment, photos, angles, the lock, the screws, the dust layer. Then the investigator reached in and pulled the backpack out slowly. It came free with a small scraping sound. Dust drifted off it in a dry puff, the kind of dust that tells you the timeline without words. Inside the backpack, they found Daniel Rourke. Not him physically, not like that. Not a body. Not the kind of discovery that makes headlines for horror, but they found his identity, his wallet, his ID, his fare card, a small notepad with the interview address written down, a battery bank, a travel mug lid that matched the mug found earlier under a seat, and his phone. The phone was dead. It had been dead for a long time, but it was there. And there was something else that made the investigator pause longer than he meant to. The backpack was repacked. Not by a person in a rush. The items were arranged, neatly, as if someone had taken the time to make it orderly inside the cavity. It did not look like a backpack that fell into a hole during a chaotic moment. It looked like a backpack that was placed. The compartment itself added more detail. Along one metal beam were scuff marks, not random, repeated. The kind you get when something rubs against the same point over and over. There were scratches on the inner surface near the edge where the panel closed. There was a faint residue on the locking mechanism like lubricant. And on the compartment floor beneath where the backpack had sat were a few small fragments. A broken plastic clip, a bit of fabric, a single earbud. Someone had been there, or something had moved there. The police reopened Daniel's case with urgency that felt almost insulting after 18 months of drift. But urgency, late as it was, still mattered. They pulled the old file. They compared. The bus number matched. It was the same vehicle, the one from the video, the one from the last known sighting. The underfloor compartment was the underfloor compartment his sister had begged them to open properly. Now it had been opened. Now it had answered. Not fully, but enough to make the bus stop being just a bus. The immediate question was the one that makes everyone uncomfortable because it points to a failure that should not be possible. How did a man's backpack end up inside a locked underfloor compartment on an active bus? There were two broad explanations. One, Daniel himself put it there. That idea sounds ridiculous until you consider it carefully. Could someone crawl into an underfloor compartment from inside a bus? Possibly if there was an access point under a seat or panel inside. Some models have interior maintenance hatches. Some have gaps. If a person was confused or hiding, they might try. But then you remember the video. Daniel vanished between stops in a narrow time window. He would have had to lift a floor panel, get into a cavity, pull his backpack in after him, and then somehow close the panel on a moving bus with other passengers in minutes. It did not fit. Two, someone else put it there. Someone with access. Someone who knew the compartment existed. Someone who could open and lock it. A driver, a mechanic, a supervisor, someone inside transit. That possibility felt dangerous to say out loud because it meant the public infrastructure had been used as a tool for a private act. It meant the bus didn't just carry people, it could hide them. The next step was to learn how the compartment could be accessed. Transit brought in technical diagrams. Mechanics walked investigators through the bus design. The compartment could be opened from underneath in the depot. It could also be opened from inside, but only by removing a section of flooring near the middle seats, which was not meant for passengers. However, there was a weakness. A particular seat row had a slightly loose panel, is because of repeated wear. It was supposed to be secured with screws. Over time, screws strip. Panels flex. People step on them. A gap appears. A person with knowledge could lift it. Not easily, not casually, but possible. Then the lock. The lock had been replaced with a newer cylinder. That meant someone changed it after the bus entered service, and they did it without logging it. That alone was a policy violation. It also meant someone wanted different keys. They checked depot key control. Transit had a key box. It was supposed to be monitored. It was supposed to log who signed out keys. Those logs were not perfect. People are casual around routines. Someone forgets to sign. Someone borrows. Someone hands off. Over months, a system like that becomes porous. Porous enough for a person to keep a key without being noticed. The investigators returned to the original surveillance footage with new eyes. They zoomed in on Stop B. They watched the aisle movement again. This time they noticed something that had seemed irrelevant before. A man standing near the back door, blocking the camera's view for a fraction longer than necessary. He wore a dark hoodie under a light jacket. His posture was slightly angled, like he was creating a screen. When the view cleared, Daniel's seat was empty. The man in the hoodie stayed on the bus. That was important. They tracked him through subsequent stops. Cameras on the bus captured him until he exited later. He got off near a row of warehouses. The footage wasn't crisp enough to identify his face clearly, but it was enough to describe him. They pulled external camera footage at that stop. A nearby shop had a camera. It caught the man leaving the bus and walking briskly toward an alley. Then he vanished from view. Not helpful, but it told investigators the disappearance wasn't necessarily a solo event. Someone might have coordinated movement inside the bus. They interviewed passengers again. Memory is unreliable, but sometimes it improves when you show people what they missed. They found the student with headphones. He remembered nothing. They found the man in a reflective vest. He remembered stepping off at Stop B. He remembered a brief crowding by the door. They found the grocery bag woman. She remembered a weird scrape sound near the floor, but assumed it was the bus suspension. That scrape sound matched the scuff marks in the compartment. Now the case had a shape. Not a full shape, but enough to build a theory with edges. Daniel had been seated near the mid-floor panel. Stop B created a moment of crowding. Someone blocked the view. Something happened at the floor. Daniel was gone. The bus continued. The question that followed was the one nobody liked. What exactly happened? Because whatever happened had to be fast, quiet, controlled. Investigators considered the possibility that Daniel had been targeted, not random, because random events are messy. They create noise. People react. Someone notices. Targeted events can be quieter. Someone chooses a person who looks isolated. Someone who won't be missed until later. Someone who doesn't draw attention. Daniel fit that profile, which is a cruel thing to realize about a person after the fact. They pulled Daniel's phone data, what little they could. It had died at some point, but they recovered fragments. The phone had attempted an emergency call, not completed. A partial. A pocket dial, possibly. But the timestamp landed precisely in the gap between Stop A and Stop B. That detail made everyone's throat tighten. because it suggested fear or sudden urgency. They also recovered a note on Daniel's phone, the interview address, the time, the name of the manager he was supposed to meet. He had been oriented to normal life. He wasn't planning a dramatic disappearance. Now investigators had a working theory. Daniel was forced into the underfloor cavity. Not necessarily into the compartment itself, because that was locked, but into the cavity access point beneath the loose interior panel, which connected to the underfloor compartment area. If someone knew the structure, they could push a person downward quickly, then close the panel. The bus could keep moving. The person would be trapped in darkness beneath a floor that thumped with footfalls and engine vibration. Then, later at the depot, someone could open the compartment from below, place Daniel's backpack inside, lock it, and close the panel. That would remove evidence from the passenger area. It would also create a controlled storage for items, but that still left the biggest missing piece. Where was Daniel? The backpack was there. Daniel wasn't, which meant either he got out or he was removed. The underfloor space did not have an external exit on the route. It was sealed. There were no hatches that opened to the road. So removal would have required depot access, someone with keys, time, privacy. The investigation turned toward transit staff, not in a sweeping, accusatory way, in a narrow, patient way, because accusing an entire workforce gets you nowhere. You need one person, one mechanism. They reviewed driver schedules for that day. The driver on Daniel's bus was named Everett Klein, 49. 15 years with transit, no major disciplinary actions, average performance reviews, a man described by coworkers as quiet, sometimes prickly, sometimes helpful. He had been interviewed early in the case. He had seemed bored, almost annoyed. He said he didn't remember Daniel. He said he didn't notice anything unusual. He said people come and go. The investigators returned to him with a different kind of attention. They asked about the underfloor compartment. They asked about the lock. They asked about who had access. Everett insisted he didn't have that key. Drivers weren't supposed to, only mechanics. They asked if he ever saw mechanics change the lock. He said no. He said locks get replaced all the time. They asked where he went after his shift that day. He gave a timeline. The timeline had gaps. Not huge, not cinematic, but enough. They checked his badge swipe records at the depot. He had entered the garage after his shift ended, which was not unusual. Drivers sometimes walked through to grab something to talk to mechanics to use the restroom, but he stayed inside longer than usual. They checked camera footage from the depot that day. There were cameras in some areas, not all. The angle was imperfect. Still, they saw Everett walking toward the maintenance bay where that bus was parked. Then he vanished behind vehicles and pillars. Then later, he reappeared and left. It didn't prove anything. It made the air colder. They checked his financial record with proper warrants. No sudden windfall, no obvious payments, no new car. That didn't clear him. It just meant the motive, if there was one, wasn't simple profit. Then they looked at who had performed maintenance on that bus in the weeks prior. A mechanic named Jared Sloan had worked on the bus's heating system. Another had replaced brake pads. Another had done routine checks. Jared Sloan stood out for one reason. He had access to locks. He ordered parts. He signed off on small replacements. He also had a record of minor violations, missing paperwork, shortcuts, a few warnings about not following procedure. Nothing huge. The kind of thing that often just means someone is sloppy. But sloppiness is also how secrets hide. Investigators interviewed Jared. He was 38. He had the greasy confidence of a man who knows his hands can fix what other people can't. He seemed irritated at being questioned. He said he fixed buses. He said he didn't know anything about missing people. They asked about the lock cylinder, and they showed him photos. He recognized the type. He said it was a standard replacement part. He said it could have been swapped easily. He said lots of mechanics could have done it. Then they asked the question that always makes liars stumble if they're lying. They asked why it wasn't logged. He shrugged. He said paperwork gets missed. He didn't realize that answer was both believable and terrible, because it meant there was no clean way to trace who had the key. The investigators had one more piece of data. A small smear of residue on the lock cylinder, lubricant. They tested it and compared it to lubricants used in the depot. It matched a specific brand used by one mechanic more than others. Not because the brand was unique, because the mechanic ordered it and kept it in his locker. Jared. Now the case began to tighten. They obtained a warrant to search Jared's locker and vehicle. They found spare keys, lots of them, unlabeled. They found a small container of the same lubricant. They found a roll of tape, a utility knife, nothing illegal by itself. Mechanics have tools. Then they found something that did not belong in a mechanic's locker, a fare card, a spare fare card. It was Daniel's fare card, not the one found in the backpack. Another. Daniel's account had been issued a replacement card months before he vanished, one he'd never used. The card had been mailed to his apartment and likely tossed in a drawer. How would Jared have it? The only plausible answer was that someone had been in Daniel's apartment or had access to his mail. That opened a new channel. They checked Daniel's building. A small, aging complex with a mailroom that had been broken into more than once. Residents complained. Management shrugged. It was one of those places where security is a word you say, not a thing you have. They found records of minor thefts around that time. Packages missing. Mail tampered with. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a serious investigation back then. Now it mattered. If someone had been watching Daniel, they could learn his schedule, learn he had an interview, learn he would take the bus. And a bus, compared to a car, is vulnerable. Because a bus is public, and public places can hide private acts if the act is designed correctly. Investigators dug deeper into Jared's background. He had a history of fixations. Complaints from an ex about obsessive behavior, a restraining order that had expired, reports of harassment that never became charges. Again, nothing that screams kidnapper. But patterns aren't made of screams. They are made of repeated small things. Then they pulled Jared's phone location history. On the morning Daniel vanished, Jared's phone had been near Stop A. Not on the bus route by chance. Stationary. Then it moved along the route for a short window. Then it returned toward the depot. It matched the time window. Jared claimed he was at home that morning, sleeping after a late shift. The phone data did not agree. He could argue the phone wasn't with him. He could argue it was wrong. He could argue 100 things. But combined with the locker evidence, it was enough to shift him from possible to primary. The investigators still needed Daniel. They still needed the answer to where he went after the bus. They considered the worst and most likely scenario. He had been removed at the depot. That meant he could have been taken in a vehicle from the garage. They checked depot cameras for vehicles leaving around the time Everett and Jared were both present. There was one, a white service van that left the depot mid-afternoon, earlier than scheduled. The van belonged to transit maintenance. It was used for off-site repairs. It was not unusual for it to leave. The unusual part was the timing and the person behind the wheel. Jared. He claimed it was a routine errand. He claimed he picked up parts. He claimed he went to a supplier. The supplier records didn't match. No purchase logged, no receipt. They searched the van. It had been cleaned. Not vacuumed, cleaned. The kind of cleaned you do when you don't want microscopic evidence. Still, forensic teams find things most people don't think to remove. They found fibers. They found a hair. They found a faint trace of a chemical cleaner used to break down biological residue. It didn't confirm Daniel. It confirmed intent to erase. That was when the case, which had been drifting in gray space, turned black. The investigators brought Jared in again. No dialogues, no dramatic shouting, no confession in a fluorescent room. Real life doesn't usually deliver clean theater. Real life delivers pressure. They confronted him with phone location data, with the key ring, with the lubricant match, with the van timeline. Jared's story shifted in small ways. He tried to keep it controlled, but control is hard when the details don't align. He finally admitted to being near the route. He admitted to being on the bus, briefly. He tried to frame it as coincidence. He tried to frame it as curiosity about the missing person story later. He tried to frame it as normal. It wasn't normal. The investigators still didn't have Daniel's location, but they had a new angle. The underfloor compartment had not been the only hidden space on that bus. That model had a secondary cavity in the rear, accessible through an exterior panel near the wheel well. It wasn't meant for passengers. It was meant for wiring and an emergency kit. It had been checked superficially early on. Now they checked it properly. They found tool marks on the fasteners. Someone had opened it with a tool, not the proper key. Inside were traces of fabric, a small piece of plastic from a backpack buckle, a single coin, a torn corner of a notepad page. This didn't mean Daniel was in there. It meant he had been moved through there, a path. The bus itself had been used like a hallway. They obtained a warrant to search a storage unit rented under Jared's name. The unit was in an industrial area not far from the depot. The kind of place with rows of roll-up doors, bad lighting, and security cameras that record at low quality unless something spectacular happens. Inside the unit, they found camping gear, tools, a folding chair, a small cot. It looked like someone's private hideout. Then they found a second lockbox. Inside the lockbox were personal items, not Daniel's at first glance. A watch, an old phone, a set of keys, a small photo strip with faces scratched out. Trophies. That word is ugly. It feels sensational. It also fits, because normal people do not keep anonymous personal items in a lockbox in a storage unit. They found Daniel's interview notepad. The paper was stained and creased, not destroyed, kept. They found his missing car key. That meant Jared had access to Daniel's home at some point, or had taken the key off him. The investigators still didn't have Daniel. They still didn't have the final piece. Then the case shifted one more time because of something both mundane and brutal. Mechanical necessity. The bus, the same bus, was scheduled for a full undercarriage refurbishment. It had been in service for years. It needed deeper work. Panels removed, systems checked, a job that forces you to open spaces most people never see. Luis Calderon, the mechanic who found the backpack, was asked to assist. He didn't want to. He did anyway. He was a professional, and he also had that quiet stubbornness some mechanics have. If a machine hid something once, you want to know what else it hid. They stripped parts of the underfloor assembly. They removed insulation. They removed a section of paneling. Behind that paneling, they found an aftermarket modification, a narrow metal bracket that did not match factory hardware, a latch mechanism that wasn't in the design diagrams, a hidden secondary cover inside the cavity. It wasn't a secret compartment the way people imagine in movies. It was a crude modification, practical, functional, built by someone who understood how to make a space in plain sight. They opened it. Inside was an empty void large enough to hold a person briefly, not comfortably, not for long, but for long enough to move them from one place to another without being seen. Along the inner surface were scratch marks, deep, panicked, inconsistent. They found fibers embedded in those scratches. They found a small smear of dried residue, and they didn't need to say what it suggested. Everyone in that bay understood. The bus had been used as a moving holding space, a human trap built into public transit. Now investigators had the narrative they'd been missing. Daniel was likely forced into the cavity during the crowded moment at Stop B. The person blocking the camera helped create the visual blind spot. The bus continued to the terminal, and then to the depot. At the depot, Daniel was removed through the modified underfloor void. His backpack was placed inside the locked compartment to remove it from the passenger area. The compartment lock was replaced to control access. The bus returned to service. Daniel did not. At that point, the case moved beyond transit policy failures and into criminal certainty. Not absolute, not the kind that makes a clean ending, but enough to pursue the next step, where Daniel was taken. The storage unit suggested one thing: Daniel might have been held somewhere private. They searched properties associated with Jared, a relative's garage, a friend's outbuilding, a rural cabin owned by someone in his circle. They did not find Daniel alive. They did find enough to confirm he had been kept somewhere, at least for a period. A blanket with fibers matching his jacket, a charger matching his phone model, a shoe print pattern that matched his work boots. Again, it didn't give a neat timeline. It gave reality. Messy, partial, devastating. When they finally located Daniel's remains, it wasn't in a dramatic place, not buried under a bus, not inside the tower of some grand structure. It was in a shallow wooded area behind an abandoned industrial lot, not far from where Jared's phone had pinged repeatedly in the weeks after the disappearance. The location was not clever. It was convenient. That is how many crimes end. Not with genius, but with laziness, with the assumption that time will do the hiding. Time did hide it, until a locked compartment opened. The legal case was long. It had to be. Cases built on mechanical modifications, access logs, CCTV blind spots, and forensic traces require careful explanation. There's no single moment you could point to on video and say, there, that's the act. Instead, the prosecution had to show how the bus became a tool and how the tool was controlled. Jared was charged. Everett, the driver, was investigated thoroughly. In the end, he was not charged with direct participation, but he was disciplined for policy violations and for inconsistent statements. Some believed he knew more than he admitted. Some believed he was simply the kind of person who ignored what he didn't want to see. The court doesn't convict people for being weak. The transit authority faced consequences too, not in the satisfying way people like. No dramatic CEO firing on the news, but audits, regulations, changes in key control, mandatory lock documentation, upgraded cameras, interior panel reinforcements, random inspections, changes that should have existed already. Because the most haunting element of Daniel's case wasn't just that someone did something evil. It was that the system made it possible. The underfloor compartment stayed locked for 18 months. The bus ran routes. It carried people to work and school and home. It shuddered over potholes. It opened doors. It played stop announcements. It accepted fare taps. It passed through weather and seasons, all while evidence sat under the floor, dust settling quietly. His sister, when she spoke publicly afterward, didn't lean into rage the way people expected. She was exhausted. Her voice had that drained steadiness of someone who has been forced to become durable. She said something that stuck because it was simple and terrifying. She said she used to think public places were safer because of witnesses. She said she learned that witnesses aren't the same as attention. She said you can be surrounded and still be invisible if the moment is engineered. That became the moral people repeated because morals are how we try to digest the undigestible. But Daniel's story carried a more practical warning too. A bus is not a sealed box of honesty. It is a machine. It has voids. It has panels. It has keys. It has people who know where the blind spots are. Most of the time, those blind spots are just a nuisance. A place where dust gathers. A place where a screw loosens. A place where something rattles until a mechanic fixes it. In this case, a blind spot became a weapon without looking like one. 2 stops apart. That detail stayed in people's mouths long after the trial because it mocked the idea of distance. It suggested the world can turn on you in 5 minutes between a bakery and a gas station while you're thinking about an interview and the day ahead. After the case, riders on that route reported small changes in themselves. They sat differently, they watched the floor, they looked at panels and seams the way you look at a locked door after you've been robbed once. They also looked at each other more, not in a friendly way, in a counting way. How many people are here? Who is blocking the aisle? Who is moving when the doors open? That kind of vigilance is not sustainable forever. It fades. It has to. Human brains can't live on permanent alert, so eventually the route became ordinary again. The bus fleet changed. New buses arrived. Old ones were retired. But some drivers still say quietly that they never look at underfloor compartments the same way. Mechanics, especially Luis Calderon, changed a habit too. Luis began documenting everything obsessively. Every lock, every panel, every mismatch. He became annoying to managers. He didn't care. He said he would rather be annoying than be a man who opened a compartment 18 months too late. And if you ask him, he will tell you something that feels obvious and also feels like a confession. A machine doesn't keep secrets on its own. People do. People use machines because machines don't speak. Daniel Rourke boarded a bus on a rainy morning to go to an interview. He expected an ordinary ride. Between 2 stops, someone turned that ordinary ride into a hidden room. It took 18 months, a broken-down bus, and a mechanic with a sharp eye to open the floor and prove the truth. And that truth was not supernatural. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a mystery of the woods. It was the oldest kind of danger. A person who learned how to use the world's blind spots.